minutes after 12, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where listen, there won't be enough fishermen listening to the programme or enough people linked to the fishing industry to do it in the way that we sometimes manage to do other subjects, where I'm always gobsmacked by the... I think we first did it when we said you can only ring me if you work for the NHS, or you can only ring me if you've actually been stopped and searched, or and it worked. And I keep pushing the envelope a little bit, and one day it'll crash and burn horribly. So I'm not going to risk it today. You can only ring me if you are actually a fisherman. But there is an astonishing, genuinely astonishing. It's possible I have expended more words on Brexit on the British media than anybody else, and I am absolutely gobsmacked to see the speed and the scale of the realisation in the fishing industry that they've been sold a massive pup. Now, there are two possible paths out of this mess. Dmitry Grozobinski, who you'll know is one of our favourite trade experts on this programme, explains it best, for me at least, in terms of being easily digestible and comprehensible. So the current problems fall into one of two categories. They are either implementation problems or they are policy problems. So is it because we were so badly prepared and actually these wrinkles, these problems will be overcome, which I think might apply, or Dimitri suggests might apply to a thread that went viral at the weekend regarding the wine industry, and a fella who's actually done absolutely everything right and is still getting banjaxed at every turn by the bureaucracy and the red tape and the inadequacies of the system. So that's a crucial question. Is it the implementation that is causing these problems that you see today? Or is it a policy problem? In other words, is there actually a change to the status quo that renders these problems much closer to permanent? We would have to reopen negotiations. I mean, we're going to be negotiating for years. I hope everyone's aware of that. Get Brexit done, my Jim Royal moment there. Or is it fixable? And it looks to me as if selling fish into the single market is more policy than implementation. Another problem we've got, together we have this problem, is that, once again, we want to be wrong. I didn't really ever fully understand, even though I predicted it, to the syllable, to the letter, to the punctuation mark. I predicted fish being essentially the only thing left by the time all the other Brexit nonsense had fallen away. Even though I predicted it, I never really understood why it was afforded such great import and weight in the debate. I would have said to you that if you really thought that someone was interested in your interests, then you would probably not be best served to chuck your lot in with a bloke who sat on the European Parliament's Fisheries Committee and attended 1 out of 42 meetings that he was supposed to attend. But hey-ho, where's Nigel? That would be, for me, and I struggle now when you think back to how divisive it was. One side lying, one side telling the truth but getting abused horribly by people who believed the liars. I that's where I find it hardest to stick to the contempt for the con men, compassion for the conned argument. When you think of, who turned out to have the fishermen's best interests at heart, Bob Geldof or Nigel Farage? Funny that, isn't it? Yeah. So support them, feel sorry for them, sympathise with them. Yes, of course, but how did you end up falling for this nonsense when it was outwardly pretty obvious that if you can't sell your fish, it doesn't matter how much you can catch? 8 minutes after 12 is the time. Part of the reason why it worked, I think, why it became a thing, was because it was at least, it was very simple. It was very simplistic as well. There is water there is fish in it. At the moment, foreigners are catching some of the fish that should by rights be ours. Vote Brexit. That's all it ever was. And you can see why the fishermen might have gone along with that. The idea as long as you don't ever open Chapter 2. Remember how it works? Populism. Just, you buy it, there's no sale or return. You buy it. You're not allowed to ask any questions. No questions asked. Do you want this? Do you want to catch more fish? Yeah. Don't, whatever you do, ask any questions about who you're going to sell it to or what you're going to do with it. You see what I mean? That's populism in a nutshell. Here is an irresistible offer built on absolute nonsense, bilge and dangerous division, but as long as you don't scratch the surface of it, you won't see the nonsense. Should we take back control of our waters? Yeah. Should we leave the market into which we sell a massive majority of all the fish we currently catch? Well, that would be a bit stupid, wouldn't it? But that's how these people prosper, as you know, by encouraging you not to scratch the surface of the dishonest, irresistible offer that they make. So, yeah, straight up, how do you feel? Let's do it. We never do this, really, because it's so lazy. But occasionally I think it is quite a helpful insight into how other people's minds are cogitating. So why did the fishing industry fall for this when it was quite obvious to many, many people that these problems would be clear and present? And again, if they turn out to be problems of implementation, that's great, but it's too late for people who've already watched catches rot. Do you know that the boat that catches 1/10 of all the cod in British fish and chip shops hasn't left port since the beginning of December because the owner or the captain or however it works had calculated a little bit ahead of the game just how difficult it was going to be. So how did it happen? And yes, how do you feel? So the streets of my city, London, are currently, I would normally say they've been brought to a standstill, but given that we're in lockdown and the biggest cities and the more close you are to the centre, the less activity you'll actually see. But there is a convoy of 50-odd trucks mostly from Scotland, but joined by some English fishing companies, complaining that the government has let them down, complaining that the terms of the deal are ridiculous and damaging for their industry. Listen, I was pretty good at spotting the flies. I was pretty good at spotting the problems, and I'm telling you, I don't care how certain you are that these people deserve everything that's coming to them, it would have been very hard to predict things being this bad, all right? At least up until the Lancaster House speech. That ludicrous, that inevitable realisation that if you wanted to abolish freedom of movement, you were going to have to leave the single market. And once that penny dropped for Theresa May, everything else slotted into place. The commercial carnage and, of course, the necessity of a border in the Irish Sea or on the island of Ireland if you were going to get any deal whatsoever. So the scale of the problems for the fishing industry could not have been foreseen or predicted. Problems could have been foreseen, certainly. The scale could not. And now they're asking government for special treatment. Now they're asking government to bail them out. Now they're asking government to go back to the negotiating table and think of all the fish. Don't call me to complain about fishing from an ethical point of view. I don't know how that squeaked through last time we tried to have this conversation, but I don't consider it was fruitful or fertile in the context of the bigger picture. I will. How much sympathy do you feel for these people that are protesting in London now? I don't know what the breakdown was like in Scotland. I know the Scottish Fishing Federation was very much pro-Brexit. I think they coined the phrase a sea of opportunity, which the Vote Leave government and the Vote Leave campaigners jumped upon. Speaking of Vote Leave leaders, it was reported at the weekend that one of them has moved to America, Douglas Carswell. Again, it's the speed with which all the predictions are coming true that I find most unnerving. But with regard to the fish, they're asking for your support. I think we should give it. At the moment, I would struggle. How are you thinking? How are you feeling? 0345 6060 973. And I don't know if you're ready to do this yet, but why did you fall for it? You might have been one of those people. I guess if you were sending me the really nasty abuse, you're unlikely to have felt the scales fall from your eyes yet. But if you really did buy into the rhetoric of control our waters without stopping to wonder where we'd sell our fish if we weren't in the single market anymore, could I ask you politely, if I promise not to be rude to you, to tell me who you blame for the fact that you fell for it? Do you blame yourself or do you blame somebody else? 0345 6060 973. And if you struggle to sympathise, then I think you need to wake up, because if you end up on the receiving end of this sort of treatment, you're going to want the public support. regardless of how you ended up on the receiving end of it. Alan Miller is the owner of AM Shellfish. He is currently on Whitehall, one of the leaders of this protest. And I begin, if I may, Alan, by asking you what success looks like. What are you hoping to achieve, and how realistic is that hope?
Well, Brexit's here to stay, so it's all about trying to tailor things for our industry. Exporting live shellfish isn't just a straightforward process.
Of course.
Timing's everything for us. And at the moment, we're having to load the shellfish a day earlier, which is just not acceptable, because going forward, we're going to get more mortality, which ends up we don't get paid for the dead shellfish. The paperwork involved is crazy. My first shipment out, I ended up with almost 400 pages between health certificates, catch certificates, customs documents, import documents, security documents, commercial invoices. It's just absolutely crazy.
I need to remind you at this point that Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, doesn't believe that any of the things you've just described are a result of Brexit.
Why is that?
He said yesterday, when the plight of people like you was described to him, he said, "I don't believe that has anything to do with Brexit." You can, if you want, take this opportunity to set him straight.
Oh, well, none of this was here before Brexit. We had none of this before.
That's a fairly crushing response, isn't it? It literally arrived on January the 1st.
Yeah.
Can I ask why you didn't see it coming?
We knew there was going to be teething problems, but this amount of issues and timings and stuff, nobody could see this coming. And that's why we're all here today. Every single company that was here today has having the same issues, having to stop boats. Boats cannot fish because they're struggling to ship their stuff out of the country.
And if these are requirements to get the shipments into the single market, unless you land it in a port that's already in the European Union, I can't currently see, and I don't want to make your bad situation worse, I can't currently see what an improvement would look like, not least because the European Union would have to agree to anything that the British government, with its tail between its legs, crawled back and begged for.
We're not going to get away from where we are just now.
No.
We need it tailored. The amount of paperwork, surely that could be digitalised, that we can load our lorries, the lorries can be left, the paperwork and all that can be sorted and sent to the lorries rather than having to hold the lorries back to get all the documents onto the lorry.
But that decision would lie entirely with the recipients, won't it? Not at this end of the journey, but at the other end of the journey. All of the control lies with the European Union.
We need our government to step up and back us for this. Otherwise, our businesses could be potential to shut the doors. And
nobody wants that, but a lot of people... a lot of passion has been expended over the last few years over Brexit. Scotland as a country, of course, voted to remain, but the fishing industry was held up by pretty much the world and his wife as a major reason to leave. Do you have a view on why that happened, how that happened, given that within 3 weeks of reality, you've been hit hardest and fastest?
Everybody votes for how they want to vote. It's what we do now. Brexit's here to stay. We need to find
I do understand that, but if you want the help and support of people that screamed, "Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this," they're going to need a little bit of help in understanding why you did it.
Well, I never voted for Brexit.
I accept that.
How other people did, then
yes.
That's up to them.
But the Federation of Scottish Fishermen was all for it, weren't they? So
everybody voted for what they thought was right at the same time, at the right time. But at the moment, it's hitting us hard, really hard.
Yes.
It's the red tape involved. Things can be tailored to. It doesn't need to move much. Slight changes just now.
Well, I hope so.
Going forward will make all the difference.
I hope so. I really do, and I wish you well. Alan Miller, the owner of AM Shellfish, describing really just in black and white the difficulties of the current situation. Good news is, of course, that Boris Johnson has got a story in one of the newspapers today about how he's going to get rid of all the red tape that British businesses are currently held under. It quite takes some front, that, doesn't it? A big story of the moment is all of the red tape that's just been introduced to people like Alan since January the 1st. Dominic Raab, though, we should stress, doesn't... Well, actually, just remind us what Dominic Raab had to say about people like Alan.
I'm not convinced that that's a result of the agreement. The agreement will Frank, well, sorry, Andrew, can I answer the question?
I wish you would, Dominic. I really do wish you would, but you didn't. I listened to the whole tape last time. He doesn't believe that what's happening to Alan is a result of the agreement that kicked in on January the 1st, even though all of Alan's negative experiences began on January the 1st. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. Here is how Faz in Totteridge responds to the dozens of trucks from the fishing industry protesting in London about what Boris Johnson's Brexit deal has done to the fishing industry. He says, stop your song on single market. We have left. No more EU flag wavering. Tell the effing Ramona audience there is no order for consumption because there is no consumers. Put sock in your whinging mouth. Get over it, James. Mate, I'm just telling you what the fishermen are saying. You remember the fishermen who, up until the end of last year, you were insisting were the reason why Brexit would be a great idea? I don't think it's me that you're cross with, Faz. However, good news, particularly welcome in these troubled times. And as things stand, the vaccination rollout fits squarely and completely into that category. There were some concerns last week that London had suffered unjustifiably in the vaccine supply. But as far as I'm aware, those wrinkles have been ironed out. Don't take my word for it, because I'm joined on the line live from a mass vaccination centre in Brent by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. I hope you're not jumping the queue.
Good afternoon. I'm here to say thank you to the amazing team who've set up a mass vaccination hub in Brent in Wembley. Really good example of actually the government listening to the concerns I raised last week. I want to thank Nadeem Zahawi, the vaccine minister. What we're seeing today is this fantastic hub set up with NHS staff doing an amazing job. And I've met some of the older residents from northwest London receiving the jab. The way to get a jab from the hubs is not to just turn up. You've got to make an appointment with the National Call Centre, and it's our way to increase the number of Londoners receiving the jab and therefore saving lives.
I mean, there's more than enough to go round at the moment, is there?
Yeah, the good news is we have in London and across the country sufficient numbers of both of the vaccines that are currently being we're getting the so-called Pfizer-BioNTech one and also the Oxford AstraZeneca one. The issue is to make sure those who need it the most get it first. So the focus is still those above the age of 80, those above the age of 70, those who live in care homes or are clinically extremely vulnerable, and those who work in the NHS and care sector. It's really important. If you're eligible, you get one. It's really important we don't have a situation where those that are eligible aren't taking them. And one of the reasons I'm here today, James, is because I'm afraid too many Londoners are hesitant about receiving the vaccine. And by me being here, I'm showing my support that I think the vaccines are a good thing. But also we're seeing people that we trust, GPs, pharmacies, doctors in hospitals and others having the vaccine as well. But also, Her Majesty the Queen's had the vaccine and the Duke of Edinburgh. So the point I'm trying to get across is let's try and address some of the concerns Londoners have to get more and more people who are eligible to receive the vaccine.
There is, as you will know, a particular reluctance reluctance is the word, among black and Asian and minority ethnic groups. Presumably that's on your priority list. But why do you think that might be? Why would BAME groups be less likely to want the vaccine than others?
My view is actually is a very, very small percentage of those groups are COVID deniers, anti-vaxxers, but a large number of them have got unreasonable concerns and questions because historically, institutions have let many of these groups down, and there is a lack of trust and confidence. And so we've got to, all of us in a position of power and influence, reassure them based upon the facts and the science. And the reality is vaccines for decades now have been saving lives. This vaccine does save lives. So we've got to just calmly explain why this vaccine is a good thing. And the good news is the numbers of black Londoners in particular, black Asian minority Londoners in particular, the number of those who are hesitant is going down week by week, and we need to make sure that continues in the right direction.
And it's not a great line, so I'll end with this question. The streets of our city are currently full of trucks from the fishing industry. It's taken them 3 weeks to complain about the deal that Boris Johnson was encouraging us all to celebrate on Christmas Eve. Are you shocked?
No, I really feel for those fishermen and fisherwomen. I really feel for them because they were sold a pup by this Prime Minister. They were made promises that have been broken, given reassurances and assurances that haven't been kept. And I'm afraid they're just one sector who are going to be disappointed by this paper-thin, flimsy deal reached between Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the European Union. We aren't seeing at the moment those in the financial services, those in professional services, those in legal, accountancy and banking protesting, culture, creative industries. But I'm afraid in a lot of sectors across the British economy, we're going to see bad times before we see good times.
You say you feel sorry for them. You became, rightly or wrongly, one of the faces associated with Remain. Well, rightly you were. You wanted us to remain. And therefore the target on your back was one that an awful lot of the more toxic wing of Brexit supporters accepted the invitation to fire at. Do you really feel sorry for them? I mean, Fish was the focal point for an awful lot of the negativity, wasn't it?
I do feel sorry for them. I mean, we all remember Boris Johnson being photographed with Fish across the country during the referendum campaign and the promises made, even afterwards, when the vote was secured. But look, I don't blame people for believing the promises politicians make. I feel sorry for anybody whose livelihood is at risk, anybody whose way of life is at risk, but also people who feel let down. And so, yeah, we should feel sorry for them because it's a really important industry. Sure, it's not the biggest industry, but it is an important industry. And over the last 20, 30, 40 years, for a variety of reasons, not because of the EU, they've seen their industry struggling. And I'm afraid they were made promises which they believed in good faith were promises that could be believed, and they've been let down.
Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, many thanks indeed. 29 minutes after 12 is the time. Just by way of, balance isn't quite the right word, but I would add that in the the Wall Street Journal now, their Brussels correspondent is reporting some unhappiness at the other end of the telescope regarding the way things are unfolding. They want the European People's Party, the largest political family in the EU, is calling for a master plan to move financial business away from London. They say we need a clear step-by-step master plan that helps key financial sector businesses move from the United Kingdom to the European Union. Actually, is the Mayor still there? Are you still there, Sadiq Khan? No, we've lost him. Right, well, next time I see him, remind me to ask him about that, because that's a beautiful illustration of the problems that many of us have. But I'm a mere pundit. He's a politician. How do you, as a politician, try to stop happening the stuff that you warned people was going to happen after you've been proved right? So the last thing the Mayor of London wants is to see huger slices of the financial sector hot-footed to the European Union, but he warned it was going to happen and he wasn't believed. Oh, he'd be a politician, eh? Ask me that again in 3 years' time. It's 12:30. Thomas Watts is here with the headlines. 12:35. It's more of a moral question, I think, perhaps, than a political one. But as dozens of trucks from the seafood industry, Scotland particularly well represented, descend upon London to protest the deal. I mean, that's what they're protesting about. They're not protesting about the implementation at this point. Essentially, they're protesting about the deal. You have to hope. Wasn't it interesting to contrast Sadiq Khan's apparently heartfelt sympathy for these fishermen with the rhetoric of "you lost, get over it," or I love it because it makes people like you and Sadiq Khan unhappy. It's funny that, isn't it? It's almost like, yeah, moral is the right word to use. What do you do? How do you process this? Because the things that we said about the fishing industry are still true. It's not a very big part of the UK economy, which is why some of us were so baffled as to why the government appeared to prioritise it so much. The one thing that they have to do, in fact, Tom puts this brilliantly. Hello, James and the team. That's you, Keith. Fishing was the one thing the government needed to get right, if only for the rhetorical reasons. It was the one tangible benefit. It really doesn't inspire confidence in their ability to negotiate. I would agree with you. This is something I got completely wrong. I thought they were going to secure a good deal for fish and a rubbish deal for everybody else, and they'd be able to distract our attention from the rubbishness of the deal for everybody else by shouting about fish all the time. As it is, they appear to have secured an even more rubbish deal for fish than they have for everybody else. So how do we move on from this together? Because an awful lot of you getting in touch to tell me how little sympathy you have for the people protesting today. Quite a few of you pointing out that none of them voted for Brexit, but we've only spoken to two, and I have no reason to doubt either of them. But the Scottish Fishing Federation was a very passionate advocate for Brexit, and it seems to me that populism was the problem. Would you like to catch more fish? Yes. whatever you do, don't ask where you're going to sell them. If you don't scratch the surface, if you make simple solutions to complicated problems, they can be persuasive and seductive and even intoxicating, but they will not be effective. All right? 3 weeks into Brexit, and the fishing industry is on the verge of collapse. An industry which exported 70% of its products to Europe, predominantly because the fish they catch are not consumed in the UK. It's a long message, that, but I haven't got time to read it all. I'll just rush to the conclusion. Compassion for the conned, ? I feel some compassion for those who may have voted to leave because of the rhetoric of the press and the likes of Farage and Johnson, but compassion for people who worked in the sector is rather harder to muster. Is that true of you? Barry's in Hull. Barry. Hello. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm really pleased to be able to get a chance to come on the show, and I listen to you a lot, and I love where you're coming from. I live in Hull. I'm not from Hull originally. I'm from the northeast. So if we want to talk about industrial devastation, we can go there, but let's not. Hull is a wonderful city, wonderful people, but the city is still devastated decades after the loss of the fishing industry.
Yes.
And these are real people. These people are my friends, and they still hark back to the fact that almost the entire city, its economy was based upon fishing, but it was wiped away almost overnight.
Yeah,
I've got quite a lot of sympathy. I know there's an argument that says that a lot of fishermen voted to leave. Actually, we were all conned, whether we voted Remain or whether we voted to leave. We were all conned. We were all lied to by the likes of Johnson, Farage, and Rees-Mogg. And these people are part of an elite that really don't care if the rest of us go to hell in a handcart. They want some sort of return to Victorian values where, we send children up chimneys. It's that level of callousness that makes me angry.
Well, I don't query your anger. I obviously, if you mention people by name, I have to stress that they haven't gone on the record calling for children to be sent up chimneys at this point in proceedings.
I apologise.
No, you don't have to apologise. Stranger things have happened. If people die in Grenfell Tower because they lack common sense, food banks are uplifting, and fish are happy because they're British, then I don't think you're necessarily stretching the realms of possibility to suggest that a clown who can come out with claptrap like that would be broadly in favour of a return to Victorian values. At least he hasn't written a book championing the Victorian era without mentioning any of the disease, the poverty or the deportations, because that would be really flipping pathetic, wouldn't it, Barry? But I digress. I was keeping it so calm then. I don't know. You just put a penny in the slot then, and 3 melons came up.
But I mean, I think...
Hang on, I just want to clarify one thing, because an awful lot of Brexit, as with Trumpism, was built upon a mythical past. Yeah. Your sympathy for the fishing industry is built upon the fact that actually for many of them, and we used to hear it from a slightly, what word can I use fairly, excitable lady in Lowestoft who would ring us, and I think she ended up in the Brexit party. For some fishing communities, the past wasn't mythical.
No, it's real.
Yeah. And it wasn't European Union membership that destroyed the past exclusively. It was quotas being sold, it was sustainability, it was environmental changes, it was all sorts of things. But how could the fishermen of Hull not have asked themselves, where are we going to sell all this extra stuff we're going to catch, never mind the stuff we already catch? That's where sympathy strains, I think.
I think it's partly people were sold this wonderful future, this wonderful upland where we'll be able to have a blue passport and we'll be able to have an empire again. It's all that.
But no, I know all that. I wrote the book, literally. Yeah. But where? I mean, why did nobody ask? Where are we going to sell our fish?
Do you know what, James? I have no idea. There's a lot of things that I think people didn't ask. I mean, an example for me is a city like Hull has got 7 miles of empty fish docks.
Yes.
And you can only turn so many of them into leisure parks.
Fancy developments.
Yeah, there'll be more exciting new jobs. No, there's not. I know fishing is a dirty, hard, dangerous industry, but what it brought to a city like this was some pride and some self-respect and some honour. And I'm not saying that the city doesn't have that now, but there's pockets of it. But people were able to hang their identity on an industry. And unfortunately, they were promised the earth. And as you said, or as the show said this morning, 3 weeks into this, it's falling apart.
It appears, yeah. But to be fair, though, of all the people you've mentioned, at least Nigel Farage has set up his new charity on the docks in Hull, helping people get into business, helping them retrain for new jobs. And, you know, that full-page advert he took out in the Hull Daily Mail apologising for misleading the fishing industry. You've got to give him credit for that, Barry.
Yeah, but what jobs can he get? What jobs will people get in a country that doesn't build anything anymore?
One thing you can help me with, and just for the benefit of the tape, I was being sarcastic about Nigel Farage. I don't know Hull well, although my dad was on the Hull Daily Mail early on in his career, and it is a brutal business. And you mentioned the North East, which, of course, for manufacturing and mining has walked this path before. There's a contrast between emotion and reality here. People feel nostalgic for work that was actually backbreaking. That's part, perhaps, of the problem, is that they say the good old days were flipping awful.
Yeah.
If you were down a pit or if you were on a trawler, but somehow when you get public school educated people like Nigel Farage mythologising and romanticising the fishing industry, it lands, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think that the problem we get is, you know, we can be nostalgic for these things. And I look at my late father, who passed away recently.
I'm sorry.
He worked in a shipyard, and my brother went in the shipyard, not after him, he followed him into the family business, as it were. And when the shipyard closed, it was devastating for Middlesbrough, absolutely devastating.
Yes. But
my brother said to me, he said, do you know what? He said, one good thing, he said, is my father doesn't have to go to that dirty place every day.
It's a weird one, that.
Yeah, it's a paradox, isn't it?
A paradox is the word. It's the walls of my middle-class bubble are never thicker than when trying to work out that sort of thing. And, of course, you know, the walls of my middle-class bubble aren't that thick, given that, as I say, my dad was on the Hull Daily Mail, and a lot of our family friends from our days in Yorkshire were miners or involved in the mining industry. So you know the ghost towns that are left behind when industry moves out. And if someone turns up, you know, with a plummy accent and a chalk striped suit and starts talking about making Hull great again, or making Doncaster great again, or making Middlesbrough great again, you can see how decent people fall for it. I guess the question of decency becomes acute when you wonder at what point clinging on to it becomes unforgivable. Because it's taken 3 weeks for the fishing industry to realise that Brexit was a very, very bad idea. And the fishing industry, as some of us explained and predicted, was pretty much the only area in which there was a realistic chance of a, quotes, win, end quotes. Given that the original divvying up of the quotas did lend itself to an analysis that cast Britain as a loser. But here we are, 3 weeks in, and it's already fallen apart. Do we know why yet? It's 12:45. 12:48 is the time. I can't. You can't. I mean, it would be hugely hypocritical of me to suddenly abandon the argument I've been making for 4.5 years, which is that the effort and expenditure put into persuading people to vote against their own interests was so epic that you can't blame them for doing so. I can't expect everyone to agree with me, and I will resist the urge for the time being to suggest that the nicer you are, the easier you find it to feel empathy. But just have a little look around, you know. Think of who has had the privilege of sitting behind this microphone over the last few years. Look at who owns the newspapers. Everybody with power, pretty much, in this country told you that it was going to be a good idea. And the best example they had, the sector they reached for first, was fish. So it is of epic import that 3 weeks into Brexit, the fishing industry has broken ranks and described the damage that has already been done to their sector. And in fact, you know, we've spoken to a few people, and we've spoken to a couple of the people protesting, but my colleague from Global Radio's Scottish newsroom, Alan Zaczynski, has got a much more powerful quote than anything I've managed to secure today. Spoken to a man from a fishing company based in Eyemouth, DR Collins, and the quote, very simply, is: a lot of people are seeing their livelihoods evaporate before their eyes, and they're helpless. I don't know, honestly, whether it's something you should be boasting about, feeling no sympathy whatsoever for these people. And you say, well, they voted for it. But they voted for it because we are a deferential nation. You can put a Mewling pencil in his dad's old suit and stick a monocle in his eye and people think he's clever. You know, Boris Johnson can lie through his teeth to anybody and everybody he's ever met, from wives and bosses to constituents and party leaders. So he must be very good at it. And then, of course, Nigel Farage, who, for reasons that will never, ever, ever make sense to me, had red carpets rolled out for him at every single studio in this country, despite the fact that on the very, very, very rare occasions he was interviewed by anybody who knew what they were talking about, he fell apart faster than a well-oiled kipper. So I'm sorry if it upsets you, but I feel very sorry for these people, okay? Give me a call if you want and tell me why you don't, and we can have a friendly set too. 03456060973. 12:51 is the time. Geraldine's in Waltham Forest. Geraldine, what would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome.
I think the fish industry is obviously at the forefront right now because it was during the Brexit campaign.
Yes.
But as well because of the nature of their goods. You know, they can't hold on to their goods. Fish rots. You pick it, it rots. Okay. But as it happens, it's all industries that are affected. It's thousands of businesses. You're not hearing about them right now because our goods are piled into the warehouses. But basically,
also because the right-wing newspapers that sold Brexit are not exactly going to be scouring the land for evidence that Brexit was an appalling idea.
No, but we are busy battling. We don't even have time to talk between ourselves because we're battling what's going on. It is not just teething problems, as I have to say. It's the way it's set up. The deal is not set up for the 21st century because thousands and thousands of businesses sell direct to a customer in Paris like they would in Leeds. These are new modern ways of selling. This deal is like going back 50 years when you only sold through distributors. It doesn't work for the 21st century. And basically, we are strangling the economy right in the middle of COVID and all the other problems that we've got. This deal strangles the economy. Yeah. And I think you will hear more and more from businesses. And I'm honestly extremely worried where the country is going because we're talking about fish, but it's all industries.
What sector are you in? What sector are you in?
I sell, I design and sell furniture, kids' furniture. So, but do you know what? It's irrelevant what I sell, whether it's kids' furniture, whether it's...
No, it's not irrelevant to me. I'm interested, that's all. But the point is that you could sell into Lyon...
Every industry.
Into Lyon with no more obstacles than you would sell into Leeds, and now they have thrown up trade barriers. We've put up trade barriers.
It's the way we sell in the 21st century. We don't sell, we don't trade the way we did 30 years ago when we didn't have the internet. So it's not fit for purpose. It's not fit for the 21st century.
I suspect,
and it's unbelievable because it's not just little old me, little business. It's thousands and thousands of businesses.
Have you forgotten about all the lovely sovereignty, though, Geraldine?
Well, the thing is, for me, this is the disaster that was waiting to happen is happening.
And we have to hope that it doesn't, because as Dr. Martin Luther King reminded us, you don't drive out hate with hate, you drive out hate with love. So you do not want these people to suffer unduly. The problem is that if we end up, if we end up, say, 30% worse off than we were before, instead of 50% worse off than we were before, or even if we end up 10% worse off than we were before, people will claim victory. People will literally say, the sun still came up. What happened to Project Fear? People like Geraldine need to be heard. The country has voted to make business harder. And... a few of you pointing out I'm not supposed to be talking about this today. Robert Jenrick wants us to talk about statues. So just ask yourself that. Why on earth would a senior government minister write an article explaining how they're going to protect statues at this point in our island history? Death toll off the charts at the moment. The worst in Europe. The economic impact of coronavirus, the worst in the developed world, according to some measures. Brexit reality finally beginning to bite. And what have we got? We've got Priti Patel feeding stories to the newspapers about stop and search. And we've got Robert Jenrick feeding stories to the newspapers about statues. Let me run you through that again, because that is how we've ended up in the place we've ended up in. Highest death toll, I think per million now, it's second highest. Highest death toll in Europe overall. Worst economic impact in pretty much the whole of the developed world. The one industry promised or cited as the absolute banker for Brexit bonuses, fishing, has taken 3 weeks to call foul and demand a special dispensation. And the Housing Secretary is writing about statues, while the Home Secretary is trying to revivify the racism / stop and search debate. So again, I just ask you to take a moment to reflect upon how many people in our industry fall for these invitations, and at what point you have to wonder whether, if you're falling for these invitations, if, for example, today I chose to speak to you about statues or stop and search while not paying proper attention to the death toll, the recession, or the fishing industry, you have to ask at what point I would become complicit in the con as opposed to merely a reporter of it. Mark's in Storrington in West Sussex. Mark, how did this happen?
Well, James, hi.
Hello, mate.
I've been involved in the fishing community off the south coast for about the last 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And when I say the community, I'm talking about the other end of the scale, which is the charter boats.
Right.
Where they go out and they get a group of people on and they go out fishing, etc., etc.
Like leisure fishing.
Like leisure fishing, yeah, absolutely. But obviously these guys are in the fishing industry. They earn a living off going fishing, and all the people. Now, a certain Mr. Farage was a very, very regular visitor on one of the boats down there for a number of years.
Oh, really?
And he was basically had everybody eating out of his hand. Had the skippers, the crews, everybody in the fishing community. They thought he was charming. They thought he was entertaining. But they also thought that this is the man that's going to sort our fishing.
Yes, and charming and entertaining are negotiable. They're very much in the eye of the beholder, but they thought he was honest.
Yes.
They thought he was honest.
Oh, they really did believe it, and they thought, and the anti-EU rhetoric from the time that he started making his, if you like, his celebrity appearances and his photo shoots on the boats holding his fish, the anti-EU rhetoric visibly, audibly went up over that period of time that he was there. And he just basically had... He's very convincing. The man is a very, very convincing salesman to those who don't understand the detail.
Well, you say that, and I agree he is, but he's also spectacularly easy to dismantle. Spectacularly easy to dismantle, which is why, for me, the abiding mystery of his particular dance in the spotlight is the mystery of why more people didn't pull him to pieces. Because trust me on this, it's incredibly easy to do, and I believe footage is still available of me proving that. But never mind, to give the fella an even break, I'm sure he'll be along imminently to explain what's gone wrong, how he'd fix it, to champion the fishing industry, and suggestions that instead he's trying to set himself up as a financial advisor shortly after spaffing 10 grand on a bet that Donald Trump would win the American election. Those must surely be exaggerated. Should we do it again tomorrow morning from 10? I'm game if you are. Here's Sheila Fogarty.